Dr. Sarah Chen adjusted her worn lab coat as she walked through the pristine corridors of the Galactic Research Station Omega-7. The other scientists barely acknowledged her presence, their conversations dying to whispers as she passed. She had grown accustomed to being invisible among the brilliant minds of a dozen different species. The station housed the galaxy's most prestigious xenobiology research facility, where the greatest intellects from across the known worlds gathered to study the mysteries of alien life. Sarah was the only human on a team of 43 researchers, and she knew exactly what they thought of her species. Humans were the newcomers, the primitive beings who had only recently stumbled into faster-than-light travel. The Xanthari delegation whispered about human inadequacy in their melodic language, their crystalline forms shimmering with what Sarah had learned was amusement. The towering Vorthak researchers communicated through bioelectric pulses, their discussions creating light patterns that danced across their translucent skin. Even they seemed to find humans fascinating in the way one might find a particularly clever pet amusing. Sarah made her way to Laboratory 7, where she spent most of her days cataloging tissue samples from newly discovered worlds. It was grunt work, the kind of menial task that kept her busy while the real scientists made breakthrough discoveries. She didn't mind. The work was honest, and it paid enough to send money back to the human colonies. As she settled at her workstation, the massive viewing screen at the front of the lab flickered to life. Dr. Zefhar, the station's Quellian director, appeared with an announcement that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Attention all research personnel," the octopus-like being's translator crackled. "We have received a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. A previously unknown species has launched an unprovoked attack on the Outer Rim settlements. The species calls itself the Drakari Empire, and they appear to be highly aggressive and technologically advanced." The screen shifted to show grainy footage of sleek, predatory ships tearing through space. The vessels moved with a deadly grace that spoke of military precision and overwhelming firepower. Sarah watched as entire space stations were reduced to debris in seconds. "The attacks began 3 days ago," Dr. Zefhar continued. 17 colonies have gone silent. All attempts at communication have been met with violence. The Council is mobilizing our defensive fleets, but early reports suggest these Drakari possess weapons technology that surpasses our current understanding. Around the laboratory, Sarah's colleagues began discussing evacuation procedures and research protocol suspensions. Their voices carried the edge of panic that comes with facing the unknown. The Xanthari researchers were already calculating probability matrices for survival, while the Vorthak began organizing data backups with military efficiency. Sarah remained silent, her hands steady as she continued her work. The tissue sample before her belonged to a creature from the Kepler system, its cellular structure unlike anything in the known databases. She made careful notes about its adaptive properties, her handwriting neat despite the chaos erupting around her. Dr. Chen, called Dr. Mistral, a Xanthari whose crystal form pulsed with nervous energy. "Are you not concerned about these developments? Your human colonies are among the most vulnerable targets." Sarah looked up from her microscope, her expression calm. "There's nothing I can do about it from here," she replied simply. "The work continues." Dr. Mistral's crystals flickered in what Sarah recognized as confusion. Most species would be demanding immediate evacuation, or at least expressing some form of distress. The Xanthari had difficulty understanding human emotional responses under the best of circumstances. The hours passed as more reports filtered in. The Drakari seemed unstoppable, their ships appearing without warning and striking with surgical precision. They targeted military installations first, then civilian populations. No prisoners were taken, no communication was attempted. They simply arrived, destroyed everything in their path, and moved on to the next target. By evening, word came that the human colony of New Geneva had fallen. Sarah continued her work, her movements precise and methodical. She recorded her observations, filed her reports, and prepared the next batch of samples for analysis. Her colleagues watched her with growing bewilderment. As the night shift took over, Sarah finally closed her laboratory notebook and gathered her things. She moved through the station's corridors with the same quiet efficiency she brought to her research. In her quarters, she sat before her personal communication terminal and composed a brief message to her sister on Earth. "Emma," she wrote, "things are getting complicated out here. Take care of yourself and the kids. I love you all." She paused before adding a final line. "If anyone asks about my service record, tell them to check the classified files." After sending the message, Sarah opened a sealed compartment in her desk that none of her colleagues knew existed. Inside lay items that seemed completely at odds with her identity as a quiet research scientist. Military dog tags bore a name and rank that would have shocked anyone who knew her. Commendation medals spoke of valor in battles that officially never happened. And at the bottom of the compartment, wrapped in protective cloth, lay a weapon that no civilian researcher should possess. Sarah held the plasma rifle with the familiarity of long practice. Her fingers found the power cells and ammunition packs stored alongside it. Everything was exactly as she had left it when she retired from active duty and tried to build a normal life among the stars. The communications system chimed with an incoming priority message. Sarah read the brief text twice before deleting it entirely. The message was coded, but its meaning was clear. The Galactic Council's conventional forces were failing. The Drakari were adapting to every strategy thrown at them, learning from each engagement and becoming deadlier with every victory. Sarah looked out her quarters viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere among those points of light, an unstoppable enemy was consuming everything in its path. Her colleagues were brilliant beings who could unravel the mysteries of life itself, but none of them understood the simple mathematics of war. She did. Tomorrow she would continue to be Dr. Sarah Chen, the quiet human researcher who cataloged alien tissue samples and kept to herself. But tonight, she began to remember what it felt like to be Staff Sergeant Sarah Chen of the Terran, Special Operations Command, veteran of conflicts that the galaxy preferred to forget. The next morning brought news that made the entire research station tremble with fear. The Drakari had obliterated the Galactic Council's Third Fleet in less than 6 hours. Admiral Korthval, a legendary Quellian strategist with over 2 centuries of military experience, had been leading humanity's most advanced warships alongside vessels from a dozen allied species. The battle had been a massacre. Sarah arrived at Laboratory 7 to find her colleagues in various states of panic. The Xanthari researchers were calculating evacuation routes with mathematical precision, their crystal forms pulsing rapidly as they processed probability scenarios. The Vorthak had formed a circle, their bioelectric communications creating frantic light patterns across their transparent skin. Even the usually calm Silvari botanists were abandoning their plant studies to monitor news feeds. Dr. Zephar's announcement confirmed everyone's worst fears. "The Council has declared a state of galactic emergency," the station director's translator announced. "All research facilities are to be evacuated within 72 hours. Transport vessels are en route to collect personnel and essential data." "What about our research?" Dr. Mistral asked, her crystalline form flickering with distress. "Decades of work will be lost." "Better than our lives being lost," replied Dr. Vexthul, a towering Vorthak whose bioelectric patterns had shifted to deep amber. "These Drakari seem intent on total annihilation." Sarah continued her work at the microscope, examining cellular structures with the same methodical approach she had maintained for 3 years on the station. Her colleagues' growing panic seemed to wash over her without effect. "Dr. Chen," Dr. Mistral approached her workstation. "I do not understand your species' response to crisis. Are you not processing the severity of our situation?" Sarah looked up from her sample, her expression unchanged. "I understand the situation perfectly. We have approximately 18 hours before the nearest Drakari patrol reaches this sector. Assuming they maintain their current expansion pattern, the evacuation ships will arrive in 36 hours, which means we'll have a significant gap in coverage." The precision of her analysis surprised several nearby researchers. Dr. Mistral's crystals shifted to a confused purple hue. "How did you calculate that timeline?" "Pattern recognition," Sarah replied simply, returning to her microscope. "The Drakari are systematic. They clear sectors in a grid pattern, moving from military targets to civilian populations. We're next on the list." Throughout the day, More disturbing news arrived. The Drakari weren't just winning battles, they were learning. Each engagement showed new tactics, adapted strategies, and countermeasures that suggested an intelligence far beyond what the Council had anticipated. Their ships seemed to evolve between battles, incorporating defensive measures against weapons that had previously worked. Dr. Zefhar called an emergency meeting as evening approached. The station's common area filled with researchers from every department, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony of worry. The director's tentacles writhed with stress as he addressed the gathered scientists. "I have received updated intelligence from the Council," he began. "The Drakari are not merely conquering, they are studying. They capture examples of our technology, our biological data, even our cultural artifacts. It appears they are conducting some form of comprehensive analysis of our civilizations." "To what end?" asked Dr. Kethril, a reptilian saurian whose scales had turned a deep brown with anxiety. "Unknown. But their methods suggest they view us as specimens rather than sentient beings. Every world they have taken has been stripped of all biological and technological resources before being abandoned." Sarah listened from the back of the crowd, her expression thoughtful. The pattern was familiar. Total information gathering followed by resource extraction. It was the methodology of a species that viewed other life forms as data to be collected rather than beings to be respected. As the meeting dispersed, Sarah made her way to the station's communication center. The facility was nearly empty, most staff having already begun evacuation preparations. She accessed a secure terminal and began typing a message using codes that had not been activated in over 5 years. The response came faster than she had expected. A single word appeared on her screen. "Confirmed." Sarah deleted the message and returned to her quarters. The items in her hidden compartment seemed to call to her with increasing urgency. She had spent 3 years trying to forget the weight of the plasma rifle, the feeling of tactical armor against her skin, the constant awareness of threat assessment that had once been second nature. The communication chime sounded again. This time the message was longer, filled with technical specifications and tactical assessments that painted a grim picture. The Galactic Council's military commanders were finally beginning to understand what they faced. The Drakari weren't just another aggressive species. They were something entirely different. Sarah read through intelligence reports that described enemy tactics with disturbing familiarity. The systematic approach to conquest, the rapid adaptation to countermeasures, the complete disregard for civilian populations. It all pointed to something she had hoped never to encounter again. She opened another secured file on her personal terminal, one that required biometric confirmation to access. The contents would have terrified her colleagues, but they brought Sarah a grim sense of clarity. Her service record contained details of conflicts that officially never happened, battles fought against enemies that the galaxy preferred to pretend didn't exist. The Drakari weren't the first species to emerge from the dark spaces between the stars, with overwhelming technological superiority and complete disdain for other life forms. They weren't even the worst. Sarah had fought creatures that made the UA current threat look manageable, though she doubted her colleagues would find that information comforting. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Mistral stood at her door, the Zenthari's crystalline form pulsing with nervous energy. "Dr. Chen, I wanted to check on your evacuation preparations. Most personnel have already begun packing their essential research." Sarah gestured for her colleague to enter. "I'll be ready when the transports arrive." Dr. Mistral's crystals shifted to a deeper blue, indicating confusion. "You seem remarkably calm for someone whose entire species is under threat of extinction." "Panic doesn't improve survival odds," Sarah replied. "Clear thinking does." "But surely you must feel some emotional response to the crisis?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the stars beyond her viewport. "My species has faced extinction before, Dr. Mistral. We're still here." The Zenthari's form flickered with surprise. "I was not aware that humans had experienced such conflicts. Your council representatives have always presented humanity as a peaceful species, focused on exploration and scientific advancement." "We are," Sarah said carefully, "but peace doesn't mean we've forgotten how to fight." After Dr. Mistral left, Sarah sat in the darkness of her quarters and began to plan. The evacuation ships would arrive tomorrow evening, assuming they weren't intercepted by Drakari patrols. The research station would be abandoned, its valuable scientific data scattered across a dozen different worlds as the galaxy's greatest minds fled for their lives. But Sarah had begun to suspect that running wouldn't be enough. The Drakari were too methodical, too adaptive, too relentless. They would hunt down every refugee ship, catalog every piece of technology, and study every biological sample until they understood everything there was to know about galactic civilization, unless someone gave them something else to think about. Sarah reached into her hidden compartment and began assembling her equipment with practiced efficiency. Tomorrow, her colleagues would see Dr. Sarah Chen board an evacuation transport like any other refugee scientist. But tonight, she was remembering how to be something the galaxy had tried very hard to forget humans could become. The evacuation ships arrived 6 hours ahead of schedule, their hulls scarred from hasty modifications to accommodate the various atmospheric requirements of different species. Sarah watched from Laboratory 7 as the massive vessels docked with the research station, their cargo bays opening to receive refugees and critical research data. Her colleagues moved with barely contained panic, racing to save years of scientific work. Dr. Mistral's crystalline form had turned almost white with stress as she desperately tried to compress quantum biological databases into portable storage units. The Vorthak researchers worked in perfect coordination, their bioelectric communications creating complex light patterns as they organized the evacuation of live specimens. Sarah continued her routine sample analysis, seemingly oblivious to the chaos around her. She made careful notes about cellular mitosis rates in samples from the Proxima Centauri system. Her handwriting as neat and methodical as ever. Only someone watching very carefully might have noticed that her observations now included detailed assessments of adaptive defensive mechanisms and rapid evolutionary responses to environmental threats. Dr. Zephar's voice echoed through the station's communication system. All personnel must board evacuation vessels within 4 hours. Priority is given to essential research data and live specimens. Personal belongings are limited to 15 kilograms per individual. Dr. Chen, Dr. Vexthal approached her workstation, his towering form casting shadows across her equipment.
Have you completed your preparations?
The Terran transport vessel has reserved space for you. Sarah looked up from her microscope. Almost finished with today's samples. I'll board with the final group. The Vorthak's bioelectric pattern shifted to puzzled amber. Your dedication is admirable, but these samples can be completed elsewhere. The Drakari advanced scouts could arrive at any moment. Then these might be the last samples from this region for a very long time. Sarah replied calmly. The data could be important. As the hours passed, the station gradually emptied. Research teams departed with their most critical work, leaving behind laboratories that had once buzzed with the excited energy of discovery. Sarah moved through the abandoned corridors, ostensibly checking for forgotten equipment, but actually conducting a thorough reconnaissance of the station's layout. The facility's defensive systems were minimal basics, shields designed to deflect space debris and small meteor strikes. The communication arrays were sophisticated but fragile. Most importantly, the station's fusion reactor core was accessible through maintenance tunnels that would be unmonitored during the evacuation. Sarah made her way to the final transport, where Dr. Mistral waited with visible relief. The Xanthari's crystals had returned to their normal blue hue now that evacuation was nearly complete. I was concerned you might attempt to remain behind, Dr. Mistral said as they walked toward the docking bay. Your species' tendency toward self-sacrifice is well documented. Self-sacrifice only makes sense if it serves a purpose, Sarah replied. Running away sometimes serves a purpose too. The transport ship's cargo hold had been hastily converted to accommodate multiple species. Environmental suits and atmospheric processors created pockets of breathable air for different respiratory systems. Sarah found herself assigned to a section with other humanoid species, including several Saurian researchers and a family of Valerian civilians who had been visiting the station. As the ship began its departure sequence, Sarah excused herself to use the waste facilities. The transport's corridors were cramped and poorly lit, designed for cargo rather than passengers. She made her way to an emergency maintenance shaft that provided access to the ship's external sensor array. Working quickly, Sarah installed a small device among the sensor equipment. To any casual inspection, it would appear to be a standard navigation beacon. In reality, it was a sophisticated tracking transmitter that would broadcast the ship's location on frequencies that the Drakari had demonstrated they could monitor. She returned to her assigned space, just as the transport cleared the research station's docking bay. Through the small viewport, she watched the facility grow smaller among the stars. In 12 hours, the ship would reach the nearest safe harbor in the Kepler system. The refugees would scatter across dozens of worlds, carrying their research and their fears to new hiding places, but the beacon would ensure that their journey didn't go unnoticed. Dr. Mistral settled beside her, carefully arranging her portable data storage units. "I have been thinking about your assessment of the Drakari timeline," the Zenthari said quietly. "Your calculations were remarkably precise. Do humans receive military tactical training as part of your scientific education?" "Some of us do," Sarah answered carefully. "Cross-disciplinary study can be valuable. Indeed, I have been reviewing the tactical assessments provided by the Council's military advisors. Their projections differ significantly from yours. They estimate we have at least 48 hours before the Drakari reach this sector." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Different analytical methods can produce different results. Over the following hours, she listened to her fellow refugees discuss their hopes for sanctuary and their plans to rebuild their research elsewhere. The Saurian scientists debated the ethics of abandoning their work, while the Alarian family made quiet plans for settling on one of the agricultural worlds where their children could grow up safely. Sarah contributed little to these conversations, instead focusing her attention on the ship's communication systems. Regular status updates from other refugee vessels painted a picture of organized retreat across multiple sectors. Thousands of civilian ships were fleeing toward the galaxy's inner systems, carrying the remnants of a civilization that had never faced a threat like the Drakari. 8 hours into their journey, the first emergency transmission arrived. A refugee convoy from the Altair system had been intercepted and destroyed. No survivors, no communication from the attackers. The vessels had simply vanished from sensor readings, leaving only debris and silence. Dr. Mistral's crystals flickered with renewed fear. "They are hunting us systematically. How did they locate that convoy so quickly?" "The same way they've located everything else," Sarah replied. "They're very good at finding what they're looking for." More reports followed as the hours passed. Refugee ships disappearing without distress calls. Evacuation convoys that reached their destinations only to find Drakari forces already waiting. The pattern was clear. The enemy possessed intelligence capabilities that far exceeded anything the Galactic Council had anticipated. Sarah excused herself again, making her way to the ship's communication center. The skeleton crew was too busy monitoring emergency channels to pay attention to one refugee accessing a public terminal. She sent a brief message using codes that would be meaningless to anyone without the proper training. The response came within minutes. 3 words that confirmed her suspicions and sealed the fate of everyone aboard the transport. "Package. Delivered. Confirmed." Sarah deleted the message and returned to her seat among the other refugees. Dr. Mistral was reviewing her research data, trying to preserve years of work in the limited storage space available. The Saurian scientists discussed theoretical models for adapting their studies to new environments. The Alarian children slept peacefully, unaware that their parents' whispered conversations centered on fears they were too young to understand. In 2 hours, they would reach the Kepler system's outer sensor perimeter. In 4 hours, they would dock at the refugee processing station that had been established on Kepler Prime. The children would be assigned to temporary housing. The scientists would begin the slow process of rebuilding their careers in exile. Sarah checked her chronometer and began to calculate distances and travel times with the precision that had once made her one of the most effective military tacticians in human space. The beacon she had installed would ensure that this transport's route was thoroughly documented. Every ship that followed the same path would be walking into a carefully prepared trap. But that was exactly what she wanted. As the other refugees settled into uneasy sleep, Sarah remained awake, watching the stars through the viewport and remembering lessons learned in wars that had taught humanity the difference between winning and surviving. Sometimes, she reflected, The only way to protect innocent lives was to ensure that the enemy's attention was focused somewhere else entirely. The transport ship continued toward what its passengers believed was safety, carrying refugees who trusted that they had escaped the worst threat the galaxy had ever known. None of them realized that one of their fellow passengers had just painted a target on their ship that would be visible to every Drakari hunter in the sector. Sarah closed her eyes and began to plan her next move. Soon her colleagues would discover that the quiet human scientist they had worked alongside for 3 years was not what she appeared to be, but by then, it would be too late for any of them to change what was coming. The Drakari attack came exactly when Sarah had predicted it would. The transport ship had just entered the Kepler system's outer sensor grid when space around them erupted in brilliant flashes of exotic energy. The first warning came from the ship's automated systems, multiple contacts appearing on sensors that should have detected nothing but empty space. Sarah was already moving before the alarm klaxons began to sound. While her fellow refugees stumbled in confusion, she made her way to the emergency equipment lockers with the practiced efficiency of someone who had survived similar attacks before. The ship shuddered under weapons fire that turned the hull plating into superheated plasma. All passengers to emergency stations. The captain's voice crackled over the communication system, distorted by electromagnetic interference from the Drakari weapons. We are under attack by unknown hostile forces. Dr. Mistral's crystalline form had turned completely transparent with terror. How did they find us? We followed all the evacuation protocols. Sarah was pulling emergency pressure suits from their storage compartments, her movements quick and sure. Put this on, she told the Zenthari researcher, handing her a suit designed for humanoid physiology. The hull's been compromised in sections 4 and 7. How do you know that? Dr. Vexthal demanded, his bioelectric patterns flashing in rapid sequences of confusion and fear. Because that's where they always hit first, Sarah replied, helping the massive Vorthak into an emergency atmospheric unit, life support and propulsion systems. Standard boarding tactics. The ship lurched violently as something impacted the hull with tremendous force. Emergency lighting bathed the cargo, hold in red illumination, while automated systems announced hull breaches and system failures in the calm voice of a computer that didn't understand. Panic. Sarah had finished distributing emergency equipment to the nearby passengers when the first Drakari breached the cargo hold. The attackers came through the wall itself, their weapons cutting through hull plating like it was paper. They moved with inhuman coordination, their sleek armor gleaming under the emergency lights. The refugees screamed in multiple languages and electromagnetic spectrums as the Drakari swept into the hold with their weapons raised. Sarah found herself looking directly at one of the attackers, a being that stood nearly 3 meters tall, its form encased in technology that seemed to blend mechanical and biological elements into something that was neither, and both. The Drakari's helmet was transparent, revealing features that might have been humanoid if they hadn't been enhanced with cybernetic implants that pulsed with the same energy signatures as their weapons. Its eyes found Sarah among the crowd of terrified refugees, and for a moment that stretched into eternity. Predator and prey studied each other. Then Sarah did something that shocked every witness in the cargo hold. She smiled. The expression wasn't one of fear or madness. It was the cold, calculated smile of a professional who had just confirmed an important theory. The Drakari warrior tilted its head slightly, perhaps recognizing something in that expression that set Sarah apart from the other refugees. Attention cargo hold occupants. The Drakari's voice echoed from translation devices built into its armor. You will be processed for biological and technological analysis. Resistance will result in immediate termination. Around Sarah, her fellow refugees began to understand what processing meant as more Drakari entered the hold carrying devices that looked disturbingly like medical equipment. Dr. Mistral's crystals flickered with desperate communication patterns, attempting to establish some form of dialogue with their captors. We are scientists, she transmitted through her species' standard first contact protocols. We mean no harm. Perhaps we can find common ground for peaceful coexistence. The nearest Drakari turned toward the Zenthari researcher with what might have been curiosity. Then it raised a weapon that hummed with contained energy and reduced Dr. Mistral to component atoms without any change in expression. The casual nature of the execution sent the other refugees into complete panic. Some tried to flee toward the damaged sections of the ship. Others attempted to hide among the cargo containers. The Saurian scientists called out for mercy in languages that their captors ignored completely. Sarah remained exactly where she was, watching the Drakari with the analytical detachment of someone studying an interesting specimen. When one of the warriors approached her with a scanning device, she neither fled nor resisted. The scan lasted several seconds, during which the Drakari's cybernetic implants pulsed with increased activity. Anomalous readings detected, the warrior announced to its companions. This specimen requires individual analysis. Sarah allowed herself to be separated from the other refugees, noting how the Drakari moved and communicated. Their coordination was perfect, their equipment seamlessly integrated with their biology. They were efficient predators, but they were also researchers. Every action served the dual purpose of maintaining control and gathering information. She was escorted through corridors that had been transformed into temporary laboratories. The Drakari had converted the transport ship into a mobile research facility, with the same systematic approach they brought to conquest. Captured refugees were being subjected to various forms of analysis, some biological, some technological, all conducted with the detached professionalism of scientists studying lower life forms. Sarah's escort brought her to what had once been the ship's conference room. Now it served as an interrogation chamber, its walls covered with displays showing data streams from the ongoing processing of other passengers. A single Drakari waited inside, its armor more elaborate than the others, marking it as some form of command authority. "You are the human specimen designated Chen." "Sarah," the commander stated, consulting data that flickered across its helmet display. "Your biological and psychological responses differ significantly from other members of your species." "How so?" Sarah asked calmly. "No elevated stress indicators, no fear pheromones, no involuntary muscular tension responses. You observe our procedures with analytical interest rather than emotional distress." The commander moved closer, its scanning equipment humming as it studied her. "Explain this anomaly." Sarah met the alien's gaze directly. "I've seen this before. Impossible. The Drakari Empire has no previous contact with human space." "No," Sarah agreed. "But you're not the first species to emerge from the dark spaces with overwhelming technological superiority and complete disregard for other life forms." The commander's cybernetic implants flashed in patterns that Sarah was beginning to recognize as indicators of increased processing activity. Elaborate. The void hunters from the Magellanic clouds, the consuming swarm from the galactic edge, the machine collective from beyond the outer rim. Sarah counted them off on her fingers with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. All of them followed the same pattern. Systematic conquest, biological analysis, technological absorption. All of them thought they were the ultimate predators. Past tense suggests these species are no longer active threats, the Drakari commander observed. What was their fate? Sarah's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes made the alien commander take an involuntary step backward. They met humans. The interrogation chamber fell silent except for the hum of alien technology and the distant sounds of processing continuing throughout the ship. The Drakari commander's scanning equipment registered readings that seemed to confuse its analytical systems. "Your species is classified as technologically inferior," the commander stated. "Galactic Council records indicate humans achieved faster-than-light travel only recently and possess limited military capabilities." "The Galactic Council knows what we've allowed them to know," Sarah replied. "Most of our member species prefer to think of humans as peaceful explorers and researchers. It helps them sleep better." "You are claiming that human military capabilities have been deliberately concealed?" Sarah tilted her head slightly, considering the question. "Commander, what would you do if you discovered that one of the species in your galactic community had a documented history of killing gods?" The Drakari's cybernetic implants went completely dark for several seconds before resuming their normal patterns. When the commander spoke again, its voice carried a different tone, one that suggested its threat assessment algorithms were running probability calculations at maximum capacity. "Gods are mythological constructs. No species possesses the capability to—" "The Void Hunters thought the same thing," Sarah interrupted quietly. "Right up until the moment they realized that humans don't just fight to win. We fight to make sure our enemies can never threaten anyone ever again." The commander was silent for a long moment, its scanning equipment working at frequencies that created an almost musical hum. Finally, it asked the question that Sarah had been waiting for. "What do you want?" Sarah smiled again, and this time the expression was neither cold nor calculating. It was the warm, genuine smile of someone who had finally found exactly what she was looking for. "I want to go home, Commander, and I want you to give me a ship fast enough to get there before your main fleet arrives." The Drakari commander's request for verification came faster than Sarah had expected. Within hours, warrior scientists throughout the captured ship were accessing every database in known space, searching for information about the conflicts Sarah had mentioned. Their findings created the first crack in the Empire's absolute confidence. The records were fragmentary. Most governments had classified the details of humanity's involvement in what they termed xenocide incidents at the highest levels, but the basic facts were undeniable. 3 times in the past century, advanced predator species had emerged from the dark spaces beyond the galactic rim. 3 times they had begun systematic campaigns of conquest and extinction against galactic civilization, and 3 times those species had simply vanished. Sarah sat in the converted conference room, watching the Drakari commander process information that challenged everything its species believed about galactic power structures. The alien cybernetic implants flickered through increasingly complex patterns as it attempted to reconcile the data with its understanding of human capabilities. The Void Hunters possessed technology that rendered entire star systems uninhabitable, the commander stated, reading from reports that had been sealed for 70 years. Their ships were capable of consuming stellar energy directly. They eliminated 17 advanced civilizations before their activities ceased. 18, Sarah corrected quietly. The official records don't include the hegemony worlds. Those were never reported to the Galactic Council. The cessation of Void Hunter activities corresponds precisely with increased human military deployments to previously uncharted sectors. This correlation appears in all 3 extinction events. The commander's voice carried no emotion, but its scanning equipment registered elevated processing activity. "Explain this pattern." Sarah was quiet for several moments, seemingly lost in memories that brought no pleasure. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of experiences that had shaped her in ways her colleagues at the research station could never have imagined. "The galaxy has rules, Commander. Sophisticated species negotiate. Peaceful races seek diplomatic solutions. Even aggressive civilizations usually respond to overwhelming force with surrender rather than extinction." She met the alien's gaze directly. But sometimes something comes from the dark that doesn't follow any rules, something that views other life as raw material to be processed. And humans respond to such threats how? "We break them," Sarah said simply. "Completely permanently. We make sure they can never hurt anyone else. Ever again." The commander consulted additional data streams, its cybernetic implants processing information at speeds that created visible heat signatures. Human military doctrine appears to emphasize total warfare rather than conquest. Your species destroys enemies rather than subjugating them. "We've learned that some threats can't be reasoned with, Commander." The Void Hunters proved that when they processed entire worlds down to their component atoms. The consuming swarm demonstrated it when they turned captured populations into biological weapons. The Machine Collective confirmed it when they began converting sentient beings into computational resources. Sarah stood and moved to the chamber's viewport, looking out at the stars beyond. Each of those species was technologically superior to anything the galaxy had ever seen. Each of them was convinced that they were the ultimate predators. And each of them made the same mistake, which was, they assumed that humans would fight like the other species they had encountered. They expected us to follow the rules of civilized warfare, to seek survival, to negotiate when defeat became inevitable, to surrender when resistance became hopeless. The Drakari commander's scanning equipment hummed with increasing intensity. "Your species does not follow these patterns?" Sarah turned back toward the alien, her expression carrying a mixture of sadness and grim determination. "Commander, when humans fight for survival, we don't fight to win. We fight to make sure our children will never have to fight the same war. That means our enemies don't get to retreat, regroup, or return stronger. They simply stop existing." The chamber fell silent as the commander processed this information. Around them, the ship continued its journey toward the Kepler system, carrying its cargo of captured refugees and alien researchers who were beginning to understand that their newest conquest might be more complicated than anticipated. You are claiming that your species possesses the capability to eliminate the Drakari Empire, the commander stated finally. I'm claiming that your species has made the same error in judgment as your predecessors, Sarah replied. You've assumed that because humans appear peaceful, we must be weak. You've confused our preference for civilization with an inability to become something else when necessary. The commander accessed additional files, its cybernetic implants creating light patterns that Sarah was learning to read as indicators of stress. The alien was discovering that human involvement in galactic affairs had been far more extensive than anyone had realized, and far more violent than the Galactic Council's public records suggested. These classified reports describe human military capabilities that exceed current galactic standards, the commander observed. Weapons that violate several interstellar treaties, tactics that are considered war crimes by the Geneva Conventions of Space. Those treaties were written by species that had never faced existential threats, Sarah explained. They assume that warfare can be civilized, that conflicts can be resolved through acceptable levels of violence. But when something like your empire emerges, the rules change. Elaborate. Sarah returned to her seat, her movements deliberate and controlled. The Void Hunters had technology that could drain stars. Our response was to develop weapons that could collapse their dimensional anchor points, stranding their fleets in spaces between realities where they would starve for eternity. The commander's cybernetic implants flickered uncertainly. The consuming swarm could adapt to any biological weapon we deployed, so we created viruses that attacked their adaptation mechanisms themselves, turning their greatest strength into a fatal weakness that consumed them from within. The alien scanning equipment registered readings that suggested its threat assessment protocols were operating beyond normal parameters. The machine collective could process any digital attack and turn it back against us. Our solution was to introduce chaos algorithms that infected their computational systems with pure randomness, making them incapable of logical thought. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her expression becoming more intense. Each of those conflicts taught us something important, Commander. When fighting monsters, sometimes you have to become something monstrous yourself. The difference is that we remember to stop being monsters when the war ends. The Drakari commander was silent for a long time, processing information that fundamentally challenged its understanding of galactic power dynamics. When it finally spoke, its question revealed the depth of its confusion. If human military capabilities are as extensive as these records suggest, why does your species maintain the fiction of being a minor galactic power? Sarah's expression softened slightly, showing a hint of the sadness that came with carrying knowledge too heavy for most beings to bear. Because the other species need to believe we're peaceful explorers and scientists. They need to think that the universe is a place where problems can be solved through negotiation and compromise. Even when faced with extinction, especially then, hope is a precious thing, Commander. The other species need to believe that civilization can protect them, that diplomacy can save them, that someone will negotiate a peaceful solution even when facing the worst threats imaginable. Sarah stood again, moving back to the viewport. We let them believe that because it's better for everyone if they never have to discover what humans become when hope fails. The commander joined her at the viewport, its imposing form dwarfing her human frame. And what do humans become in such circumstances? Sarah's reflection in the transparent aluminum showed an expression that had nothing to do with the quiet research scientist her colleagues had known for 3 years. We become the thing that kills gods, Commander. We become the nightmare that makes nightmares wake up screaming. The alien cybernetic implants went completely dark for several seconds before resuming their normal patterns. When the commander spoke again, its voice carried a note that might have been uncertainty, an emotion its species was not designed to experience. What is your proposal? Sarah turned toward the Drakari commander with the smile of someone who had finally reached the point she had been working toward since the moment of her capture. I want to go home, Commander. I want you to give me a ship and let me warn my people that the Drakari Empire has decided to make the same mistake as the Void Hunters, the Consuming Swarm, and the Machine Collective. And if we refuse? Sarah's smile didn't change, but something in her eyes made the alien commander's threat assessment algorithms trigger emergency protocols. Then your empire will discover what happens when humans stop pretending to be civilized. The Drakari Empire's response to Sarah's proposal came in the form of a ship that defied every convention of galactic vessel design. The craft was sleek and predatory, its hull incorporating technology that seemed to bend space around itself. When the commander escorted Sarah to the docking bay where it waited, she recognized the gesture for what it was, a test. This vessel incorporates our most advanced propulsion and defensive systems, the commander explained as they approached the ship. It is capable of reaching human space in approximately 60 standard hours. However, it also contains monitoring equipment that will record your every action and transmission. Sarah walked around the craft with the appreciation of someone who understood the engineering principles involved. The ship's design was beautiful in the way that apex predators were beautiful, perfectly evolved for its purpose and absolutely lethal to anything that underestimated it. You're giving me a ship that can outrun anything in human space, armed with weapons that could level a city, and equipped with technology that your empire spent centuries developing, she observed. Either you're supremely confident that I can't use it against you, or you want to see what happens when I try. Both assessments are correct, the commander replied. This vessel will allow us to observe human military responses in real time. Your actions will provide valuable intelligence about your species' true capabilities. Sarah nodded slowly, running her hand along the ship's hull. The metal was warm to the touch, almost organic in its responsiveness. And if human military responses exceed your expectations, then the Drakari Empire will adjust its tactical assessments accordingly. Commander, has it occurred to you that giving me this ship might be exactly what I was hoping you would do? The alien's cybernetic implants flickered through rapid calculation patterns. Explain. Sarah turned to face the Drakari commander directly, her expression showing the first genuine emotion she had displayed since her capture. It wasn't fear or anger or desperation. It was anticipation. For 3 years, I've been Dr. Sarah Chen, cataloging tissue samples and pretending that my biggest concern was cellular mitosis rates. I've attended faculty meetings and filed research reports and tried very hard to forget that I once spent 6 months hunting void hunter scout ships through the space between galaxies. She gestured toward the predatory craft before them. But you've just handed me the fastest ship in known space and pointed me toward home. Do you really think I'm going to waste time warning anyone about your invasion? The commander's scanning equipment registered readings that suggested its threat assessment protocols were approaching overload. What is your actual intention? Sarah's smile was sharp enough to cut through hull plating. I'm going to give you the demonstration you're looking for, Commander. I'm going to show you exactly what happens when humans stop pretending to be civilized. 6 hours later, Sarah was alone in the void between stars, piloting a ship that represented the pinnacle of Drakari military technology. The vessel's systems responded to her commands with an ease that suggested the alien computer. Interfaces had been designed by minds that understood the principles of intuitive control. She had spent the first hour familiarizing herself with the ship's capabilities, discovering weapon systems that operated on principles she recognized from her classified military training. The Drakari had developed some impressive innovations, but the underlying concepts were familiar. Energy manipulation, gravitic distortion, quantum disruption, all tools she had used before in conflicts that officially never happened. The ship's communication array was sophisticated enough to monitor transmissions across multiple galactic sectors simultaneously. Sarah listened to the panic spreading through refugee fleets as news of the transport ship's capture spread through civilian networks. Evacuation convoys were changing course, abandoning predetermined safe routes in favor of random jumps that they hoped would keep them ahead of Drakari pursuit. But Sarah wasn't interested in refugee ships or evacuation routes. She was tracking different signals, military communications that most civilian equipment couldn't detect, hidden transmissions between vessels that didn't officially exist, carrying messages that would never appear in any official records. It took 12 hours to locate what she was looking for. The ship appeared on her sensors as nothing more than a small cargo vessel traveling through an unremarkable system near the Perseus Arm. Its identification codes marked it as a commercial transport carrying agricultural supplies to the outer colonies. Its energy signature was consistent with a basic fusion drive and minimal defensive systems. Sarah knew better. She opened a communication channel using frequencies that hadn't been active for over 5 years. The response came immediately, carrying voice patterns that made her feel simultaneously nostalgic and deeply sad. "This is Captain Morrison of the merchant vessel Prairie Wind," the voice said carefully. "Please identify yourself and state your business." "Hello, Jack," Sarah replied. "This is Reaper 7 requesting immediate conference with Command Authority." The silence that followed lasted nearly 30 seconds. When Captain Morrison spoke again, his voice carried 20 years of shared history and the weight of conflicts that had shaped them both. "Sarah, Jesus Christ, we thought you were dead. Intelligence reported that your research station was hit by Drakari forces." "It was. I'm currently flying one of their ships, and I have approximately 48 hours before their main fleet reaches human space." "Are you requesting extraction?" Sarah looked at the tactical displays showing the Drakari vessel's weapon systems and defensive capabilities. The ship she commanded could probably destroy every vessel in the Galactic Council's combined fleets without sustaining significant damage. It represented technology that was decades ahead of anything humanity's public forces possessed. "Negative. Jack, I'm requesting activation of Protocol 7. The silence this time lasted nearly a full minute. When Morrison spoke again, his voice carried the careful tone of someone confirming orders that could reshape the galaxy. "Sarah, are you certain? Once Protocol 7 is active, there's no going back. The other species will never look at us the same way. The other species are about to be extinct, Jack. The Drakari aren't like the previous threats. They're systematic, adaptive, and absolutely committed to total conquest. If we follow the old playbook and try to handle this quietly, there won't be anyone left to worry about how they look at us." "Understood. Stand by for command verification." Sarah waited while the merchant vessel, which she knew was actually one of humanity's most advanced stealth warships, transmitted her request through channels that connected to facilities that didn't appear on any public records. She had spent 3 years trying to forget that such places existed, trying to convince herself that the peaceful scientific community she had joined represented the real humanity. But the galaxy had just reminded her that sometimes peace was a luxury that required monsters to guard. Verification confirmed, Morrison's voice returned. "Protocol 7 is now active. Command wants to know your current tactical assessment." Sarah consulted the ship's displays, calculating distances and travel times with the precision that had once made her one of humanity's most effective tactical analysts. The Drakari main fleet consists of approximately 40,000 vessels, including mobile research platforms and resource extraction ships. They're following standard expansion protocols. Overwhelming force applied systematically to eliminate all resistance. Countermeasures? They've studied our public military capabilities and developed specific countermeasures for everything the Galactic Council has in its arsenal. They can adapt to conventional weapons and tactics faster than we can deploy them. Assessment of threat level. Sarah was quiet for a moment, remembering the casual efficiency with which the Drakari had processed her fellow refugees. Dr. Mistral's terrified crystals flickering out of existence. The Alarian children who would never wake up from their peaceful sleep. Maximum, Jack. This is a Void Hunter level event. Maybe worse. Understood. New orders incoming. The tactical package that arrived contained information that would have horrified Sarah's colleagues at the research station. Weapon specifications that violated a dozen interstellar treaties. Deployment schedules for fleets that officially didn't exist. Strategic plans that had been developed by minds that understood the difference between warfare and extermination. Sarah read through the orders twice, confirming details that painted a picture of humanity's true military capabilities. Ships that could travel through dimensions where physics worked differently. Weapons that attacked the quantum foundations of matter itself. Tactics that had been developed by studying every extinction-level threat the galaxy had ever faced. "Jack," she said finally, "how long until the ghost fleets reach their deployment positions?" 18 hours for the first and third, 24 for the second and fourth. The fifth will require 36 hours due to their starting position near the galactic core. Sarah nodded, calculating timelines that would determine the fate of every living being in known space. That should be sufficient. The Drakari main fleet won't reach the inner systems for at least 60 hours. What about you, Sarah? Command can arrange extraction once the operation begins. Sarah looked at the alien ship's control systems, thinking about the Drakari commander who had given her this vessel, and the empire that believed it had found another collection of civilized species to process for their resources. Negative, Jack. I have a demonstration to complete. She closed the communication channel and set course for the coordinates that would put her directly in the path of the approaching Drakari main fleet. It was time for the galaxy's newest predators to discover what had happened to all the others who had come before them. It was time for humanity to stop pretending to be civilized. The Drakari main fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, 40,000 vessels arranged in patterns that spoke of mathematical precision and absolute military discipline. Their ships blotted out the stars, creating a wall of metal and energy that stretched across light years of space. At the fleet's heart, massive command vessels pulsed with the same cybernetic rhythms that had driven their species' expansion across a dozen galaxies. Sarah watched their arrival from her position 3 light hours away, the alien ship's sensors providing her with detailed tactical information about the approaching armada. Each vessel was a masterpiece of engineering, incorporating technology that represented centuries of conquest and adaptation. The Drakari had learned from every species they had encountered, incorporating the best elements of their victims' achievements into an empire that grew stronger with each victory, opened a communication channel on frequencies that the Drakari would certainly detect and monitor. Drakari Command, this is Dr. Sarah Chen aboard the vessel you provided for my return to human space. I have completed my assessment of humanity's defensive capabilities. The response came from the massive command ship at the fleet center, its signal carrying the harmonics of multiple Drakari consciousness, merged into a collective intelligence, human. Specimen Chen, report your findings. Sarah consulted the displays, showing her ship's position relative to the alien fleet. 3 light hours was close enough for them to observe her actions clearly, but far enough to give her several minutes of warning before any attack could reach her. Drakari Command, I need to correct a misunderstanding about my mission. I didn't go home to warn humanity about your invasion. I went home to warn humanity that you were about to make the same mistake as the species that came before you. Explain. Sarah activated the ship's external cameras, transmitting real-time video of herself to the Drakari fleet. She wanted them to see her expression when she delivered her next message. The Void Hunters, the Consuming Swarm, and the Machine Collective all believed they were encountering a collection of civilized species that could be conquered through superior technology and systematic application of overwhelming force. They all made detailed studies of galactic military capabilities and concluded that no effective resistance was possible. The communication channel carried background harmonics that suggested intense discussion among the Drakari collective. Consciousness. They were all correct in their assessments, Commander. The galactic species you've studied really are peaceful explorers and researchers. Their military capabilities really are limited to defensive actions and small-scale conflicts. They really cannot mount effective resistance against the level of force you represent. Sarah's smile was visible on the video transmission, and it carried the same dangerous warmth she had shown the Drakari commander during her interrogation. But they're not the species you need to worry about. On cue, space around the Drakari fleet began to change. It started as subtle distortions in the background radiation, barely detectable shifts in quantum field fluctuations that the alien sensors registered as minor anomalies. But Sarah knew those signatures. She had seen them before in conflicts that had reshaped the galaxy in ways that most beings never realized. The first human ships appeared like ghosts materializing from nightmares. They didn't emerge from hyperspace with the brilliant flashes of conventional faster-than-light travel. They simply became visible, as if they had been there all along but had chosen to remain hidden until this moment. Their hulls were black as the void between stars, incorporating stealth technology that made them effectively invisible until they decided to reveal themselves. The Drakari fleet sensors suddenly detected contacts appearing throughout their formation, not approaching from outside, but manifesting within their ranks as if they had been traveling alongside the alien armada for hours without being detected. Drakari Command, Sarah continued conversationally, I'd like you to meet the real human military. These are the ships that killed gods. The human vessels were smaller than the massive Drakari command ships, but they moved with a predatory grace that spoke of weapons designed for purposes that went far beyond conventional warfare. As Sarah watched, the alien fleets Formation began to shift as tactical algorithms attempted to respond to threats that their sensors were still struggling to properly identify. The ships surrounding your fleet incorporate technology that we developed while fighting. The Void Hunters, Sarah explained, her voice carrying the calm tone of a lecturer discussing abstract concepts. Dimensional phase shifting allows them to exist slightly outside normal spacetime, making them effectively invisible to conventional sensors. The first human attack wasn't what the Drakari expected. Instead of energy weapons or kinetic projectiles, the human ships released something that looked like dense clouds of metallic particles. The clouds expanded rapidly, surrounding individual Drakari vessels in swarms of microscopic machines that began interfacing directly with their hull plating. Those nanological systems were originally designed to combat the machine collective, Sarah continued. They're programmed to identify and neutralize cybernetic implants while preserving organic neural tissue. I thought you might find them particularly relevant, given your species' integration of biological and mechanical elements. Throughout the Drakari fleet, individual warriors began experiencing system failures as their cybernetic implants succumbed to machines designed to turn their greatest strength into a fatal vulnerability. Command and control networks that had operated with perfect efficiency for millennia suddenly found themselves corrupted by chaos. Algorithms that attacked the mathematical foundations of logical thought. But the nanological assault was only the beginning. The energy weapons you're now detecting were developed during our conflict with the consuming swarm, Sarah noted as human ships began firing weapons that didn't just destroy matter. They edited it out of existence entirely. Quantum erasure beams don't just kill their targets, they retroactively prevent them from ever having existed. Drakari vessels began vanishing from reality itself, leaving behind empty spaces that the universe quickly forgot had ever contained anything at all. The alien fleet's formation collapsed as ships found themselves suddenly alone in regions of space where their sensors insisted they should be surrounded by allies. The gravitational distortion generators are probably my favorite innovation from the Void Hunter War, Sarah continued, her tone becoming almost nostalgic. They create localized regions where the fundamental constants of physics operate differently. Watch what happens when the strong nuclear force becomes variable. Stars began dying. Not the gradual death of stellar evolution, but the immediate catastrophic failure that occurred when the forces holding atomic nuclei together suddenly became unreliable. The Drakari fleet found itself surrounded by regions of space where matter simply stopped functioning according to the rules that had governed reality since the universe began. Sarah. A new voice interrupted the communication channel. It was Captain Morrison, speaking from somewhere among the ghost fleet that was systematically dismantling the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever seen. Command wants to know if you're ready for Phase 2. Sarah consulted the tactical displays showing the Drakari fleet's disintegration. Thousands of ships had already been eliminated by weapons that operated on principles that violated every known law of physics. The survivors were fleeing in all directions, their perfect formation scattered by encounters with technology that turned their own strengths against them. Negative. Jack. I think they understand the demonstration. She opened a channel to the Drakari command ship, which was somehow still intact, despite being surrounded by phenomena that should have rendered its existence impossible. Drakari Command. This is Dr. Sarah Chen. I believe we were discussing terms for your Empire's surrender. The response came after a long delay, during which the alien collective consciousness presumably attempted to process what it had witnessed. When the communication finally arrived, it carried harmonics that suggested something fundamental had broken in the Drakari understanding of reality. Human specimen Chen, how is this possible? Our analysis indicated that your species lacked the technological capability for such weapons. That's because we didn't develop them through normal technological advancement, Sarah explained patiently. We developed them through necessity, Commander. Every time something like your empire emerged from the dark spaces, we had to become something worse than it was. We had to learn to fight monsters by becoming monsters ourselves. The communication channel carried sounds that might have been the Drakari equivalent of weeping. But here's the important part, Commander. The part that separates us from the Void Hunters and the consuming swarm and all the other nightmares that have emerged from the dark. Sarah's expression softened slightly, showing a hint of the sadness that came with carrying such terrible knowledge. We remember how to stop being monsters when the war is over. Around them, the human ghost fleet began withdrawing, their impossible ships fading back into the dimensions where they waited between conflicts. The Drakari survivors found themselves alone in space that no longer violated the fundamental laws of physics, surrounded by debris that proved they hadn't imagined the encounter. Your empire has a choice, Commander. You can continue your expansion and discover what happens when humans stop offering demonstrations and start conducting exterminations. Or you can return to whatever dark space you came from and find something else to do with your existence. And if we choose withdrawal, Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking about the peaceful research station where she had spent 3 years cataloging tissue samples and pretending that the universe was a place where problems could be solved through scientific inquiry and diplomatic negotiation. Then Dr. Sarah Chen goes back to studying cellular mitosis rates. And the galaxy continues to believe that humans are peaceful explorers who wouldn't hurt a fly. The Drakari command ship began broadcasting on frequencies that reached every surviving vessel in their scattered fleet. The message was brief and carried the harmonics of absolute authority. All units, immediate withdrawal to staging areas beyond the galactic rim. Operation termination effective immediately. As the alien ships began their retreat, Sarah set course for the nearest human colony. She had reports to file, colleagues to inform of her survival, and a quiet life of scientific research to resume. Behind her, the most powerful military force in galactic history fled toward the dark spaces between galaxies, carrying with them the knowledge that some civilizations were best left undisturbed. 3 months later, Dr. Sarah Chen returned to her laboratory at Research Station Omega-7, which had been rebuilt with improved facilities and expanded staff quarters. Her colleagues welcomed her back with genuine relief, having mourned her loss during the Drakari crisis that had ended as mysteriously as it had begun. She resumed her work cataloging tissue samples from newly discovered worlds, her observations as methodical and precise as ever. When asked about her experience during the evacuation, she spoke of hiding in emergency shelters and waiting for rescue with the same quiet demeanor that had characterized her 3 years of service. Only Dr. Mistral, whose consciousness had been backed up before the transport ship's capture, noticed the small changes in her human colleague. The way Sarah's analysis now included detailed assessments of adaptive defensive mechanisms, the precision with which she calculated threat probabilities, the fact that her quarters now contained equipment that no civilian researcher should possess. But Dr. Mistral was a scientist, and scientists understood that some questions were better left unasked. She returned to her quantum biological research, grateful to live in a universe where peaceful exploration was possible. Because somewhere in the darkness, monsters stood guard against the things that made monsters wake up screaming. And in her laboratory, Dr. Sarah Chen continued the quiet work of cataloging life among the stars, secure in the knowledge that as long as humanity remembered the difference between necessary and unnecessary violence, the galaxy would remain a place where hope could flourish and children could sleep peacefully under alien suns.